She wasn't the innocent girl history painted. She wasn't the sweet blonde, smiling in home videos. She wasn't the harmless companion hiding behind Hitler's shadow. She was the one person he trusted when his empire collapsed. The woman who walked into the bunker willingly. The woman whose truth was buried, rewritten, and erased after the war. This is the story they didn't want you to hear. The dark truth about Eva Braun. On a quiet autumn afternoon in 1929, Eva Braun was dusting photo frames in the back room of Heinrich Hoffmann's studio when the bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up immediately. She was used to the constant flow of customers, officers, businessmen, aging aristocrats posing stiffly in front of Hoffmann's camera. But the moment she did glance toward the door, she froze. A man had stepped into the studio who didn't fit the image of a typical politician. His posture was rigid but strangely gentle. His dark overcoat fell neatly over polished boots. His eyes, startlingly intense, seemed to drift past everyone and everything as if he saw a world only he understood. He introduced himself as Herr Wolf. That name meant nothing to Eva Braun, but it meant everything to Heinrich Hoffmann, because behind the false name, behind the polite smile, behind the myth not yet written, was Adolf Hitler, the rising leader of a nationalist movement. The man whose speeches were starting to electrify Germany, the man building an image, a myth, that required absolute devotion from millions. A myth that had no room for romance, no wife, no girlfriend, no personal weakness, and certainly no teenage girl from a photography studio. Hitler didn't charm Eva with flirtation. He didn't pursue her with intensity. He didn't make promises. He used a more powerful tactic, absence. He met her once, then didn't return for weeks. He saw her again, then vanished for months. Every reappearance felt like destiny to her. Every disappearance felt like punishment. This wasn't love. This was intermittent reinforcement, the psychological mechanism that forms the strongest emotional bonds. He spoke gently when he reappeared, gifting her small tokens. A box of chocolates, a book, a flower, a photo from a rally, gifts that felt affectionate, but were really markers of control. Eva wasn't falling for the man. She was falling for the pattern. By 1932, Hitler was traveling constantly, rallies, speeches, political negotiations. Eva barely heard from him. She wasn't part of his public life. She wasn't allowed near his political circle. She wasn't invited to events. She was invisible, except when he wanted her attention. The emotional weight crushed her. One night, alone in her parents' home, Eva took her father's pistol, pressed it to her chest, and pulled the trigger. The bullet missed her heart by centimeters. When Hitler heard the news, he visited her in the hospital briefly. Not with passion, not with fear of losing someone he loved. He came because scandal was dangerous. A teenage girl attempting suicide because of him could damage his rising political image. His words to her were careful, measured, almost bureaucratic. A promise she should take care of herself, a reassurance she would not be forgotten. Then he left, and Hoffmann managed the rest. To Eva, the visit meant something entirely different. He cared. He came. He proved she mattered. It was the moment her loyalty crystallized, and Hitler knew it. In 1933, after Hitler became chancellor, Eva was moved into a furnished Munich apartment. Elegant, expensive, decorated to perfection. But she wasn't free to enjoy it. It wasn't hers. Every detail, from the curtains to the perfumes, was controlled. Every letter she sent was reviewed. Every guest she invited was noted. Every movement was observed. She could not appear with Hitler, could not speak publicly, could not reveal their relationship. She was a secret a carefully managed piece of private property in Hitler's inner world. And yet she stayed, because her alternative was nothing. Her world shrank to the size of a living room with a locked door. But in that locked room, she discovered a tool that would later change history: a film camera, the device that would one day capture the most disturbing home videos ever shot, because they showed the one thing the world never wanted to associate with Hitler: humanity. In 1935, when Hitler again pulled away, consumed by political battles, remilitarization, and the machinery of power, Eva once again found herself abandoned. This time she swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. She left a note. "I feel forgotten." Hitler didn't rush to her side. He sent a doctor. He sent flowers. He sent a message that she must be patient. This coldness would push most people away. But for someone emotionally trapped, it only tightened the bond. Eva didn't want to escape him. She wanted him to choose her. And slowly, he did. Not because of love, but because her devotion served a purpose. Eva Braun was becoming useful, as a symbol, as a secret, as a buffer between Hitler and the private life he pretended he didn't have. She was entering the lion's den. Without ever realizing, the lion had been training her to walk in circles. When Eva Braun first stepped onto the winding mountain road leading up to the Berghof, she wasn't entering a home. She was entering a kingdom. The Alpine retreat was unlike anything in Germany. A massive white villa, carved into the mountainside, overlooking endless valleys and snow-tipped peaks. A fortress disguised as a paradise. It was here, not in Berlin, that the most powerful men of the Third Reich gathered: Goebbels, Göring, Himmler, Bormann, Keitel, Jodl, Speer. The architects of war, the engineers of destruction, the men whose decisions carved death into the map of Europe. And walking among them, with no title, no rank, no official status, was Eva Braun. The girl who wasn't allowed to exist publicly became, in the Berghof, an invisible queen. The Berghof operated under rules completely different from Berlin. There were no formal ranks at the dining table, no grand speeches, no official uniforms after sunset. You could see Göring in slippers. You could see Goebbels pacing around nervously like a frightened crow. You could see Himmler avoiding small talk, slipping into corners like a ghost. This strange informality made the Berghof uniquely dangerous, because in informal spaces, influence travels sideways, and Eva understood sideways influence better than anyone. She didn't need a political position. She had access, proximity, presence, and that alone unsettled the most powerful men around her. Hitler was never the invincible figure he portrayed himself to be. He was fragile, emotional, easily irritated, obsessed with routine, sensitive to the smallest shift in atmosphere. And Eva Braun controlled that atmosphere. If she was cheerful, Hitler relaxed. Meals stretched longer. Ministers found him easier to approach. Decisions were gentler, less impulsive. If she was upset, meetings were shortened, visitors dismissed, discussions postponed. Hitler erupted over trivial matters. No general had this power, not even Goebbels or Bormann. Eva didn't realize how much she influenced him, not directly but emotionally. But the inner circle realized it, and they feared it, because the mood of one girl could shift the course of a day, and the course of a day could shift the course of a war. The Berghof had a second hidden kingdom, not the war room, not Hitler's study, but the sunroom at the back of the house where the women gathered. Magda Goebbels, the regime's first lady. Gerda Bormann, fiercely ideological, ruthlessly controlling. Emmy Göring, theatrical, dramatic. Hannah Reich, fearless pilot, adored by Hitler. Into this circle stepped Eva Braun, the youngest, least political, yet the one with the most direct access to Hitler's private life. The women whispered constantly, who was in favor, who was falling out, who angered whom, which general misstepped, which officer made Hitler laugh, which idea seemed to please him. And because Eva lived closest to him, every sentence she spoke, and even accidentally, shaped the room. Magda Goebbels once told a confidant, "When Eva smiles, the whole Berghof breathes easier." It was both admiration and warning. Eva's 16mm film camera became a fixture everywhere she went. She filmed Hitler pouring tea, Hitler feeding Blondie, Hitler joking with children, Hitler strolling through the garden, Hitler napping in the sun, Hitler listening to music, Hitler smiling, perhaps the most forbidden image of all. These moments were never meant for the public. Hitler's myth required him to be harsh, distant, stoic, a father figure, not a man, but Eva's camera captured him as undeniably human, and humanity was political poison. This is why Allied archivists tried to bury her footage after the war, because her films did something terrifying. They made Hitler look normal, tender, playful, gentle at times. That version of him didn't fit the picture history wanted, and Eva, unknowingly, had documented it all. There is a myth that Eva Braun knew nothing about the horrors happening outside the Berghof. This is a lie. She heard the whispered conversations. She saw the SS officers come and go. She knew about the wars, the mass arrests, the ghettos, the deportations. She read newspapers carefully edited to maintain morale, but even edited news reveals truth to those willing to see it. Eva wasn't blind. She simply chose not to see. She built a bubble within a bubble: perfume, music, pets, swimming, tanning, fashion magazines, Hollywood films, afternoon cake on the terrace, a world of small, glittering distractions hovering above a continent devoured by fire. Her greatest act of survival was denial, not ignorance, denial, because denial let her stay, and staying became her entire identity. Even Hitler himself acknowledged Eva's quiet influence. He once told Speer, "When she is unhappy, everything becomes heavy." He didn't mean it romantically. He meant it literally. Eva was the emotional barometer of the Berghof, not a puppet, not a background figure, but the invisible pulse of Hitler's private life. A pulse that determined how he behaved when he returned to his political world. Her presence was subtle, her influence unspoken, her impact far greater than she ever understood. Eva Braun was not the silly blonde post-war narratives painted. She was the woman who shaped the one thing that shaped Hitler, his state of mind. When World War II erupted in 1939, the world outside the Berghof turned to flame. But Eva Braun's world became strangely brighter. Not morally, emotionally. Because Hitler, now Führer of a military empire, retreated more and more into his private universe, and Eva was the one constant inside it. As cities crumbled, Eva sunbathed on the terrace. As armies marched, Eva attended afternoon tea. As Europe starved, Eva tried new dresses, new hairstyles, new cameras. In the strangest, darkest twist imaginable, war made her feel secure, because war made Hitler need her more. Eva lived in a paradox. The Berghof was practically a dreamland. Crystal-clear skies, manicured gardens, servants in pressed uniforms, warm fireplaces, laughter floating through the halls. Meanwhile, Warsaw was burning, Rotterdam was burning, London was burning, Leningrad was starving. Death on a scale the world had never seen was unfolding in real time. and Eva filmed birthday parties on the terrace. Not because she was evil, not because she enjoyed suffering, but because she had perfected one of the most dangerous psychological defenses humans possess: compartmentalization. She didn't ignore the war. She separated it. Like two parallel worlds existing inches apart, one filled with laughter, sunshine, and dresses, and the other with unspeakable horror. Her diaries show this horrifying contrast. "Lovely dress arrived today. They say the English city burned terribly last night. We watched a comedy film this evening. So funny." There was another bombing in the East. She blended catastrophe and triviality into a single narrative, because it was the only way she could live beside the man orchestrating everything. By the early 1940s, Eva Braun no longer had a life outside Hitler. She had no real friends except those connected to the regime, no job, no independent money, no public identity, no future. Her existence was so intertwined with his that leaving wasn't just emotionally impossible. It was logistically impossible. If she left him, who was she? Not a filmmaker, not an actress, not a political figure, not even a public personality. She was a secret. A secret cannot build a new life. So she stayed, even when staying meant standing beside a collapsing empire. As Germany's fortunes declined, Hitler deteriorated. He aged rapidly. His hands trembled constantly. His back hunched. His skin turned pale yellow. His left foot dragged when he walked. His voice cracked from exhaustion and rage. Eva watched a myth decay in front of her eyes, and yet, instead of recoiling, she grew more attached. Because the weaker Hitler became, the more he relied on the emotional comfort she provided. Their relationship shifted. Before, she had waited for him. Now, he needed her to function. Her loyalty wasn't naive anymore. It was strategic. It was survival. It was identity. She had no desire to escape. She desired something else: to be the last person standing beside him when the world abandoned him. And she would get her wish. By April 1945, the Red Army had closed a steel ring around Berlin. Soviet artillery thundered day and night. Buildings collapsed. Streets burned. Hitler was entombed inside the Führer bunker, a concrete maze beneath the chancellery. He sent a message to Eva in Munich. "You must not come to Berlin." But Eva didn't hesitate. She boarded a military plane and flew straight into the heart of the inferno. Witnesses were stunned when she arrived, her hair carefully styled, her suitcase neatly packed, her face calm, almost serene. While generals trembled, she smiled. While ministers cursed their fates, she hummed songs from old films. Someone asked why she came. Her answer was devastating in its simplicity. "Where he is, I belong." It wasn't romance. It wasn't loyalty. It was the final expression of her identity. Eva Braun did not exist without Hitler. The bunker was hell. Tight corridors, sweat, candle smoke, dust, fear. People cried in corners. People screamed at one another. People shook uncontrollably as bombs crashed above them. But Eva tried to recreate the Berghof one last time. She decorated her room with flowers. She laid out her favorite perfumes. She wore her silk dresses. She played gramophone records of romantic songs. She told the secretaries jokes to lighten the mood. It was heartbreaking, disturbing, almost surreal. She wasn't delusional. She was committed. Committed to the fantasy she had lived in for 16 years. If the world was ending, she wanted it to end beautifully. The others respected her, feared her, pitied her, all at once. Even hardened officers whispered, "She is braver than all of us," or more foolish. They weren't sure which. As the bunker walls shook with artillery, Eva Braun transformed one last time. She stopped being the hidden mistress. stopped being the naive girl, stopped being the smiling blonde in home movies. She became something darker, a woman who chose the end, fully, consciously, and without hesitation. She no longer asked what would happen after the war. She no longer spoke about traveling, swimming, dresses, movies. Her future was already decided. She would not survive Hitler. She would not outlive the regime. She would not walk out of Berlin alive. And she didn't want to. The final 48 hours of Eva Braun's life were not chaotic, not panicked, not filled with fear. They were disturbingly calm. The world above the bunker had already collapsed. Berlin was burning, streets shattered, Soviet troops approaching block by block. But deep beneath the earth, behind reinforced doors and flickering bulbs, a quietness settled. A quietness before the end. On the night of April 28, 1945, an SS officer approached Eva with a message. Hitler wanted to see her, privately. She entered his study, a small concrete room cluttered with maps, trembling teacups, and the smell of candle wax. Hitler stood in the center, hunched, trembling, decades older than when she first met him. Then, in a moment that stunned even him, he asked her to marry him. He had denied her this for 16 years. He had insisted a leader must belong to the people. He had told associates marriage was a burden. But now, with the world gone and the Reich reduced to rubble, he finally offered her the one thing she had always been denied. Acknowledgement. Not love, not romance. Acknowledgement. Eva didn't hesitate. She said yes instantly. Not because she believed in fairy tales, but because this was the final affirmation that her entire life beside him had meaning. Within an hour, a registrar was summoned. Witnesses were gathered, and in the middle of a war-torn bunker surrounded by destruction, Eva Braun became Eva Hitler. Her signature, smooth, bold, confident, sat beside his shaky, deteriorated scrawl. Witnesses said she looked radiant, bright, almost glowing. Even as artillery thundered above them for one fragile night, Eva felt victorious, not politically, personally. After the ceremony, they held a small reception, if it could be called one. There was no champagne, no music, no dancing, just exhausted secretaries sipping cheap wine, Ritter chocolate, and a few slices of rationed cake. But Eva laughed. She told stories. She flirted. She made the others feel lighter simply by existing. It was as if she had waited 16 years for this exact moment. And now, with nothing left to fear, she allowed herself to breathe. One secretary wrote later, "That night, she was the happiest person in the bunker, happier than she had ever been." It was absurd. It was tragic. It was human. Eva found peace in the one place no one else could. April 30th began with distant artillery and a choking smell of smoke drifting down the ventilation shafts. Eva dressed carefully, makeup, hair curled, a blue silk dress she had saved for years. Hitler, pale and trembling, wore his gray uniform for the final time. Around 1 p.m., they shared their final meal. Pasta with light sauce, simple, unremarkable. Eva ate quietly. Hitler barely touched his food. There were no love declarations, no dramatic speeches, no tears, just two people at the end of a long, strange, destructive life together, performing the ritual of a final meal as if they were any other couple. The others watched silently. Some felt pity. Some felt disgust. Some felt admiration. But all of them knew this was goodbye. After lunch, Hitler asked Eva to join him in his study. They closed the door. No one knows what they said. There are no records, no diaries, no overheard whispers. But those who saw them enter described a haunting image. Hitler offered his arm. Eva took it gently. They walked slowly, like an aging couple returning home after a long day. This was the first and last time they walked together like equals. Whatever passed between them, forgiveness, farewells, gratitude, delusion, those words died with them. Around 3:30 p.m., a gunshot cracked through the bunker. When aides entered the room minutes later, they found the scene exactly as Hitler had dictated. Hitler slumped on the sofa, blood pooling beneath his jaw, pistol in hand. Eva beside him, lips faintly blue from cyanide, body relaxed. She had died instantly, calm, composed, without hesitation. Witnesses agreed. She looked peaceful. More peaceful than she had ever looked in life. No fear, no panic, no second thoughts. Eva Braun had walked knowingly, willingly, deliberately into death. Not because she wanted to die, but because she could not imagine living without him. Her identity had fused with his long ago. Her purpose had vanished the moment his power died. Her future ended when the Reich ended. She didn't escape. She didn't run. She didn't fight for survival. She made the final choice she had been preparing for since she was 17. If he dies, I die. And she kept that promise. When word spread, the reactions were chillingly varied. Some were horrified, some were unsurprised, some were strangely moved. General Weidling called it tragic devotion. Goebbels called it loyalty. Others whispered it was madness. But one thing was undeniable. Eva Braun, the girl who was never supposed to appear in public, had become the final witness to the downfall of the man she chose above all else. Her life ended not as a mistress, not as a secret, not as a footnote, but as the last person Hitler allowed into his world. When the bunker fell and Berlin surrendered, the world faced a disturbing challenge. How do you tell the story of a monster? If evidence exists showing he could smile, laugh, pet dogs, and relax under the sun, how do you maintain the image of absolute evil? If private films show him behaving like an ordinary man? And most importantly, how do you explain that a woman, cheerful, blonde, playful, almost ordinary, chose to stay beside him until the final breath? The answer was simple. You erase her, not physically, narratively, erase her influence, erase her complexity, erase her agency, turn her from a person into a footnote, from a partner into a passive accessory, from a moral actor into a silly, shallow girl. History cannot tolerate nuance when the world needs clarity. So the world decided Eva Braun must be remembered as nothing. The Allied investigators were the first to confront the problem Eva Braun represented. When they discovered her home films, hours of intimate footage, they were horrified. Because the films didn't show Hitler shouting or saluting. They didn't show the dictator of nightmares. They showed Hitler smiling, Hitler feeding Blondie, Hitler joking with children, Hitler relaxing on mountain terraces, Hitler making clumsy attempts at small talk, Hitler looking fragile, even gentle. To the Allies, this was dangerous. They feared that showing Hitler as human, even for a second, could open the door to sympathy, revisionism, or twisted admiration. A human monster is harder to condemn than a mythic one, so the solution was decisive. Lock the films in archives. Release only fragments that served certain narratives. Destroy duplicates. Discourage scholarly attention. And paint Eva as inconsequential. Eva Braun's footage was not just evidence of a private life. It was evidence that Hitler had one, and that was unacceptable. For decades, books and documentaries repeated a single caricature of her. The silly blonde, the shallow, childish companion, the girl who loved fashion and ignored the world, They portrayed her as vapid, empty-headed, gullible, a stereotype designed to neutralize her, because if she was stupid, then she wasn't responsible. If she wasn't responsible, she wasn't dangerous, and if she wasn't dangerous, then her story didn't need to be told. The truth is far more disturbing. Eva Braun was not stupid. She was not ignorant. She was not blind. She was a woman who chose comfort over conscience, proximity over morality, delusion over truth. She lived at the epicenter of one of the darkest regimes in history, and she embraced the benefits without questioning the cost. That is far more chilling than the silly girl myth. Eva Braun never signed laws, never ordered attacks, never commanded troops, but she also never walked away. She lived in the same house where genocidal plans were whispered. She shared dinners with men whose decisions killed millions. She heard euphemisms like special treatment, evacuation, and solutions. And she understood enough to know what they meant. She wasn't separate from the regime. She was inside its beating heart. Her camera captured the men who orchestrated horror, laughing, relaxing, unwinding. Her presence soothed the man responsible for unimaginable destruction. Her emotional influence shaped the daily rhythms of the person who determined life and death for nations. Her complicity was subtle, passive, comfortable, and that perhaps is the darkest kind. Eva Braun didn't die because she loved Hitler romantically. That's too simple. She died because she had fused her entire identity to him. From the age of 17, she had been shaped, gradually, expertly, into someone who could not imagine existence outside his world. That is why she boarded a plane into a burning Berlin. That is why she decorated her bunker room with flowers. That is why she wore a silk dress on the day she knew she would die. That is why she took cyanide without hesitation. She did not follow him into death. She followed the version of herself that only existed beside him. And that is a psychological prison more complete than any ideology. Eva Braun's story forces us to face a terrifying question. How many evils in history were enabled not by monsters, but by people who chose not to look? People who enjoyed comfort, while others suffered. People who separated their private happiness from public horror. People who said, "It's not my concern. I don't want to know. That's happening somewhere else." Eva Braun was not the architect of the Third Reich, but she was its witness, its beneficiary, its quiet reinforcement, its final devotee. Her truth is uncomfortable. That's why it was erased. Because she proved something chilling: evil doesn't always look like hate. Sometimes it looks like passive loyalty, emotional dependence, and comforting lies whispered to oneself every night. Sometimes it looks like a girl with a camera, smiling on a balcony while the world burns below.